was the Battle of Towton. It remains to this day.
The history of England is written in ink, but its borders were drawn in blood. Yet there is one day in the chronicle of this island that stands apart from all others, a day when the ink ran dry and the blood flowed like a river. It was Palm Sunday, the 29th of March, 1461. The Christian world was preparing to celebrate the arrival of the Prince of Peace, but in a frozen field in North Yorkshire, 60,000 men were preparing for the arrival of hell.
This was the Battle of Towton. It remains to this day the largest, longest, and most savage confrontation ever fought on British soil.
It was the crescendo of the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic family feud that had metastasized into a total war of extermination. Two kings, Edward IV of York and Henry VI of Lancaster, claimed the same crown. Two armies, comprising nearly 1% of the entire population of the nation, stood facing one another across a valley that would soon be known as the Bloody Meadow. What happened at Towton was not merely a battle, it was a societal catastrophe. It was a day when the weather itself took up arms, when brothers killed brothers in a blinding whiteout, and when the rivers became so choked with corpses that the living walked across the dead to pursue the fleeing. This is the story of the day the snow turned red. To understand the butchery of Towton, one must understand the hatred that fueled it. The Wars of the Roses had begun as a political squabble between cousins, but by 1461, it had descended into a blood feud. Just months prior, the Yorkist patriarch, Richard, Duke of York, had been lured into a trap at the Battle of Wakefield. He was slaughtered, and his head was cut off, adorned with a mocking paper crown and spiked on the gates of the city of York. His son, Edward, the Earl of March, was now the claimant. At 18 years old, Edward was a giant of a man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall in an era when the average man was 5'7". He was charismatic, brilliant, and consumed by a cold, terrifying rage. He was not marching north to negotiate peace. He was marching to exterminate the House of Lancaster. Opposing him was the machinery of the Lancastrian state, fighting in the name of the pious but mentally unstable King Henry VI. The true power behind the throne, Queen Margaret of Anjou, had assembled a massive host from the north, wild men from the borders, hardened veterans, and the feudal levies of the great northern lords. They outnumbered the Yorkists, confident that their sheer weight would crush the usurper. The two vast hosts converged just south of the city of York. The Yorkists had marched through bitter conditions, crossing the River Aire at Ferrybridge in a sharp, bloody skirmish that set the tone for what was to come. By the morning of Palm Sunday, the two armies locked eyes across a plateau between the villages of Towton and Saxton. The stage was set for a collision of industrial proportions. The battlefield at Towton is a plateau, flanked by a steep drop to the west leading down to the Beck, a stream swollen by freezing rain and melting snow. On that morning, the weather was not just poor, it was apocalyptic. A jagged, freezing wind howled from the south, carrying with it a dense blizzard that erased the horizon. The armies deployed in the traditional 3 battles or divisions. The Lancastrians, commanded by the Duke of Somerset, held the high ground to the north. They had the numbers, perhaps as many as 35,000 to 40,000 men. The Yorkists, commanded by Edward and his fierce ally Lord Fauconberg, stood downhill with perhaps 25,000 to 30,000. But as the lines formed, a divine intervention occurred, or a tactical disaster, depending on which banner you stood beneath. The wind shifted. It began to blow with gale force directly from the south, slamming into the faces of the Lancastrian soldiers,
freezing their eyelashes shut and obscuring the enemy line. The snow drove into their eyes, blinding them. Conversely, the Yorkists had the wind at their backs.
Lord Fauconberg, a short veteran soldier with a mind like a razor, saw the opportunity. In medieval warfare, the longbow was the artillery of the age. Usually, the two sides would trade volleys until the distance closed, but Fauconberg realized that the wind changed the physics of the engagement. He ordered his archers to step forward into the valley, unseen in the whiteout. Fauconberg gave the signal. Thousands of yew bows bent in unison. The Yorkist archers loosed a single massive volley. A dark cloud of bodkin-tipped shafts rose into the blizzard. Carried by the tailwind, the arrows flew hundreds of yards further than usual, smashing into the densely packed Lancastrian ranks with devastating velocity. The Lancastrians, blinded by the snow, heard the hiss of death, but could not see it coming.
Men dropped by the hundreds, their armor pierced, their faces shattered.
Stung and furious, the Lancastrian archers attempted to return fire. They stepped forward and loosed volley after volley into the mist. But the wind was a wall. Their arrows hit the gale and stalled, plunging harmlessly into the snow 40 yards short of the Yorkist line. Fauconberg waited. He let the enemy empty their quivers, shooting at ghosts. When the Lancastrian fire slackened, he played his cruelest card. He ordered his men to advance again, not only firing their own arrows, but pulling the Lancastrian shafts out of the snow and shooting them back. The Lancastrians were being butchered by their own ammunition. It was a slaughter at a distance, a psychological catastrophe that forced the Lancastrian commanders to make a desperate choice. They could not stand there and die. They had to close the distance. With a roar that rivaled the storm, the massive Lancastrian army abandoned their defensive position and charged. 40,000 men surged down the slope, crashing into the Yorkist line with the force of a tidal wave. The sound of the impact was said to have been heard miles away.
The battle devolved into a push of pike, or more accurately, a push of poleaxe. In the 15th century, the sword was a sidearm. The primary weapons of the heavy infantry were the billhooks and the poleaxe, brutal tools designed to crush plate armor and rip men
The
open.
horror of Towton lay in its duration. Medieval battles usually lasted a few hours. Towton raged for 10. It became a test of endurance in freezing conditions. Men fought until their muscles failed, slipping on ground that had turned into a bloody slush. When a man fell, he did not get up. He was trampled into the mud by the press of the ranks behind him. The dead began to pile up, forming a literal wall of corpses between the fighting lines. Chronicles state that the living paused only to drag the bodies of their comrades out of the way so they could reach the enemy. In the center of the line, King Edward fought like a man possessed. Towering over the combat, his armor gleaming in the gray light, he anchored his troops.
When the Yorkist line began to buckle under the sheer weight of the Lancastrian numbers, Edward threw himself into the breach, hacking down foes and rallying his exhausted men.
The Yorkists were outnumbered, and they were slowly being ground into the dust. As the afternoon wore on, the Yorkist line was bending to the breaking point. They had fought for hours against superior numbers, and they were nearing collapse. But then, looking to the eastern horizon, the soldiers saw movement. It was not the enemy. The Duke of Norfolk, who had been delayed by sickness and the treacherous roads, arrived with the Yorkist reserves. He did not arrive behind his own lines, he arrived on the flank. Thousands of fresh soldiers, eager for the fight, crashed into the exposed left side of the Lancastrian army. Men who had stood their ground for 10 hours suddenly threw down their weapons and ran. The battle ceased to be a contest and became a hunt. The bodies of the drowned and the slain piled up layer upon layer until they formed a gruesome, unstable bridge of human flesh. The Yorkist pursuers literally ran across the backs of the dead to kill the survivors on the other side. This is where the tragedy of Towton reached its zenith. The Lancastrians turned to flee, but they had nowhere to go. Behind them lay the steep, slippery slopes of the Beck. In their panic, thousands of men tumbled down the embankment, sliding in the mud and gore, crashing into the freezing water. The pursuers were ruthless. Edward had issued the order, no quarter, no prisoners. The common soldiers were cut down from behind as they tried to cross the river. The river ran red with such intensity that locals miles downstream claimed the water was undrinkable for days. It was not just a defeat, it was a liquidation. As night fell, the blizzard finally abated, revealing a landscape from a nightmare. The snow, which had fallen pure and white in the morning, was now a crimson slush stretching for miles. An estimated 28,000 men lay dead. Fathers, sons, brothers, all butchered in a single day. The Battle of Towton broke the power of the House of Lancaster and secured the throne for Edward IV, but the cost was staggering. It decimated the nobility of England and left a scar on the national psyche that would take generations to heal. Even today, nearly 6 centuries later, the farmers of Towton plow their fields and find the rusted remnants of that Palm Sunday: a spur, a ring, a skull split by an axe.
It stands as a chilling monument to the brutality of civil war, a reminder of the day when the wind blew cold, the river ran red, and the white snow of England was buried beneath the ruin of its own people.